Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos a...
Good afternoon. Welcome to this one more event in Tech&Society. I'm the director for this cycle in the Telefónica Foundation. And today we're having the third session of this edition in 2021. Our first guest for today is Vivian Schiller, director in the Aspen Institute in the United States. She has an impressive resume. She's been in the main media in the world. Only to name a few, she's been CEO in the National Public Radio. She's been the global president of news and Twitter. Also worked in the New York Times for documentaries and CNN. She's going to talk about disinformation and about its impact in democracies nowadays, and also consumer habits in reading and in journalism. After this brief introduction, she will have a dialogue with José María, director of the Aspen Institute in Spain. For those of you who are joining us for the first time in one of these sessions, I wanted to tell you that we've been working on this cycle since 2017. We've been organizing different conferences, seminars with people working in technology in different fields, education, or maybe like today regarding information, but it could be medicine, just any different fields. All these contents generated in the previous editions, you can consult them. They're available for free on our website. Now I would like to give the floor to José María de Areilza, who will introduce this dialogue that we're going to have here today. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thanks, Silvia. I just wanted to add to this introduction that Vivian Schiller is a giant in the world of journalism. It is an honor to have her with us in Madrid. She had been with us on a virtual mode with some of the debates with Aspen, Spain. And her work leading Aspen Digital is essential not only to understand the evolution of the communication media, but also the essence of democracy, which we would like her to focus on today. Her ideas, approaches, and analysis. I think the title, Journalism is Democracy, is a great title, and I think that as mass media leaders, we would hear ideas, approaches, nuances, and context to be able to think together on how to improve our ability to have quality media and to improve democracy, which is always threatened. So thanks a lot, Vivian. I'd also like to welcome Phil, her husband, and I'd like to thank you all for being here with us. It is always a pleasure to work together with Fundación Telefónica, and we hope we will have many more debates. Thanks a lot.
Buenas tardes. That's about the extent of my Spanish. Thank you for having me. Thank you for Fun Telefónica, and thank you to Aspen, España for having me. I'm just absolutely thrilled and delighted to be here. So your series is called Tech&Society, but yet what I want to talk about predates technology. It predates Facebook. It predates WhatsApp, the internet, the first computers. It even predates Gutenberg and his printing press, and that is journalism. That's what I want to talk about today, because it is a central pillar of our technology-driven information environment. It's both part of the problem and it's also part of the remedy for the very disordered information environment that we live in today. The thing about journalism is it's many things, but among them, What good journalism does is it provides context and it provides nuance. That is the opposite of what we find on social media, where really everything is reduced to an attention-getting headline. The more provocative, the better. As a result, we are becoming a society of absolutes. Black and white, good and evil. You are with us or you're against us. But that's the opposite of journalism. So as a journalist, I'm here speaking as a journalist because even though now I'm not working in a news organization, it is what I am in my heart. So if you're looking for a clean narrative from me about what is happening with the news industry, you won't find it. Instead, I want to talk about paradoxes. 3 paradoxes of the modern news media. But I will finish after that with one absolute. So paradox 1. The first paradox is the business model for news media has collapsed. And yet, it is also a spectacular era when it comes to the public support for journalism. So both of those things are true at the same time. This is a central theme. 2 things can be true at the same time. No more absolutes. So let's start with the bad, though. The business model has collapsed. So once upon a time, the revenue, and now I'm speaking mostly about newspapers, was classified advertising, display advertising, and subscriptions. And frankly, for most newspapers, subscriptions were very cheap, or you give it away because you wanted to show that you had a lot of subscribers so that you get as much advertising money as possible. So what happened with the advent of the internet is 2/3 of those pillars of revenue have basically disappeared. Classified advertising went first. It went online, which is a much better experience if you're trying to sell a boat or if you're trying to say that there's a job on offer. And then display advertising began to diminish. Because Google and Facebook and now Amazon, they are capturing 70% of all ad dollars. At least that's the statistic for the United States. Owning a newspaper has now become a losing proposition. And that's for good reason, because online you can target your ads. So you can say, if I'm selling a fancy car, I can sell it to people who only have a certain income, who look like other people who have bought those cars, who live in certain regions where those cars, are popular. And you're not wasting it by putting it in a newspaper where, lots and lots of people see it and it might be of no use at all. So this has had a catastrophic impact on news organizations all over the world. And yes, there's TV, there's radio, which the business models there are a little bit different. But the thing about newspapers, and when I say newspapers, I don't mean just print, I mean the digital versions as well. Those have the highest level of trust in survey after survey, and they're collapsing under financial pressure, particularly at the local level. So in the US, in the last 15 years, 2,100 newspapers have basically just vanished. More than 65 million Americans live in what we now call news deserts. There's no news. There's no local news, I should say. There's plenty of stuff. There's plenty of information. There's plenty of text and things flying around, but I wouldn't call it news. Of the newspapers that remain, many have been acquired by hedge funds who are basically just strip mining them for whatever profit they can, firing staff, and mostly just publishing very thin newspapers, again, I mean on print and online, mostly providing national news, not providing local news at all, or what we call pink slime sites. Pink slime are it's just a term, it's too long to explain where that term comes from, but it refers to newspaper sites that are really just spewing propaganda. Usually in the United States, it's right-wing propaganda. Without local news, statistics have shown that leads to lower civic engagement, sort of the collapse, the breaking apart of the proverbial town square. And that has given rise to more misinformation, disinformation that is filling the void in our WhatsApp groups and our Facebook groups, and on sites, local sites like Nextdoor. There's a lot of garbage out there. So this is a huge problem. And yet, the paradox is, this the fact that those revenue models have collapsed have forced news organizations to rethink their relationship for the audience. They can no longer just be a megaphone. We know the news, we're going to tell you the news, here it is in the newspaper, see you tomorrow. Rather, they need to engage with the reader, because the reader is really now the dominant source of revenue. And it has just completely changed the relationship with the public. Now news organizations need to listen and not just broadcast. So underserved communities who have never been covered are now being covered. Black and indigenous communities. There's not a lot of money coming in, but also the cost is much lower. Different forms of delivery, podcasts, newsletters, community events, being literally a physical space where the community can come in and engage with each other. And journalists can put on events. I know certain news organizations where they let clubs rent out space, because this is the way to engage with the community, because the community will then fund you. And this has been a great boon, particularly for national news organizations. The New York Times now has 8 million paying subscribers, which is just really kind of mind-blowing. Here in Spain, El País has reached 100,000 digital subscribers just 10 months after introducing the paywall in May in 2020. That's in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know what it is now. My statistic is from the beginning of the year. The Guardian, which is based in the UK, I'm on their board for full disclosure. The interesting thing about The Guardian is anybody can read The Guardian for free. And yet almost 1 million people are paying The Guardian because they want to support what they do. This is the same model as it is for public radio. I used to run National Public Radio in the United States. People can listen to it for free, and yet they give. And so this is a very promising model. It's not enough to fill the void, but yet it is really developed to a new model for journalism. So that's paradox number one. Paradox number two. Paradox number two is that the mobile consumption of news has erased the line between quality news and garbage. I'll explain that in a minute. And yet, so the internet has destroyed this sense of knowing what's quality, what's not quality. And yet, digital media has led to a flowering of storytelling. That's the paradox. So let's again start with the bad. 73% of people around the world use a mobile device for news. That's from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. In Spain, it's higher. 78% last year used their mobile devices for news. So that's great, because it gives people more access to the stories. We're all carrying supercomputers with all the world's information in our pockets. But if you look at your Facebook feed, what do you see? You see beautiful, uniform boxes. Twitter's the same, YouTube's the same. All of those boxes look the same. So it could be El País or the New York Times, or it could be IamABigFatLiar.com, or some kind of garbage or some kind of made up site. They stick a logo on it. It all looks the same. Those kind of signals of what's quality, what's not quality are erased. The platforms don't want to be gatekeepers of what is quality journalism, what hasn't. In some ways that's good, but it's also complicated. And so people don't know what they're looking at. They are just consuming the good along with the bad. Worse, those stories are fed by an algorithm. It is shocking to me that in 2021, so many people still don't understand that when they're reading their Facebook feed, it is not just a reverse chronological order of every post from everyone they follow. People don't. I know this group is very sophisticated, you understand that, but you would be shocked at how many people don't understand that. But in fact, the algorithm is feeding you the content that the algorithm has determined you want to see, that encourages you to have a reaction and to share it. What encourages us to have a reaction and to share it? Things that are provocative, things that make us angry. In fact, if you probably saw, there was a big trove of documents that was leaked from Facebook in the last few weeks. One of the stories was about how stories that have, on Facebook you can pick an emoji. The emojis that have the angry face are served higher in people's news feeds than any other reaction, because it's sticky. It makes you stick around. it also plays to people's worst instincts. So the news industry has been disintermediated by those platforms. It's hard to say in English. I certainly can't say it in Spanish. Yes, there are experiments for people who are still trying to go direct, and there's some, I mentioned the New York Times and the Guardian and others, and yes, people do directly navigate, but I'll just speak from my own experience, and I consider myself a fairly sophisticated news consumer. I start my day by looking at my feed on Twitter. So many people do, whether it's Twitter or some other platform. So, so there's a lot of those kind of experiments. None of them have really, to create some other kind of platform, really haven't stuck. And yet, this same internet that has disintermediated news, that is driving us to be angry, driving us to become more and more polarized, has opened up a never before possible set of journalism, ways to tell stories, ways to report, and ways to visualize information. The best example, recent example I can think of is maybe have heard about the Panama Papers, then there was the Paradise Papers, and now there's the Pandora Papers. I think they're gonna run out of peas. This is a trove of documents that have been leaked about 750,000 companies and their offshore holdings. 200 people in 200 different countries are implicated. So an organization called ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, they have created a network of news organizations all over the world. They all had access to these documents. They were all able to look at those documents together, online, together and separately. They reported stories of money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, other crimes, and were able to customize it for their communities. In Spain, El País, and I know La Sexta, we're partners. None of this would have been possible before the internet. Data-driven reporting. There's a phenomenal organization called Bellingcat. They're all over the world, but I guess now they're based in Brussels. Anyway, not sure. The founder is British. They use publicly available data or easily accessible data sets to uncover Russian attacks in Ukraine. They were able to track the poisoning of Russian dissident Alexei Navalny, the motives and movements of the Christchurch killer in New Zealand. So many of these stories that are told, they are stories that have bubbled up from examining the data. And then there's the way we tell stories, data visualizations. My favorite is just from today, literally, I saw some visualizations from a news organization called Climate Central, which is focusing on climate change. It's so hard to get people to care about climate change. They don't really, just doesn't feel that visceral. Yeah, it's hot out, it's raining, whatever, but the weather's always changing. So they have these amazing visualizations of cities all over the world that are at risk. It's two photos next to each other. You click, here's just the photo today, and you click on it, and it is a data visualization of what that city or community might look like in 20 to 30 years if there's no change. The streets are flooded, parts of the community just completely disappeared underwater. Paradox 3 is that journalism is going through a reckoning in the way, in their practices, in the norms of journalism. And yet it is, I believe, in my lifetime, this is the golden age of journalism. Both of these things are true at the same time. A lot of it stems from trust, and some of that trust has been lost for good reason. So the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer reveals that just under 60% of people responding to their survey in 28 countries believe, 60% believe that journalists deliberately try to mislead the public by reporting information they know to be false. This is horrifying. Now, to be sure, they might be conflating news organizations that are high quality with sort of a lot of the garbage sites that are out there that maybe are trying to mislead the public, but just trust has just collapsed. According to the Reuters Institute, their annual digital report, in the US, only 29% of respondents trust media. If you look at people who are followers of, big believers in Trump, it's in the single digits. I'm happy to report that Spain is a little higher, 36%. Better than the United States, though nothing, I think, to applaud. So what are the reasons for this failing trust? It's complicated. A lot of different reasons fit into it. So one is the rise of polarized news. You know, in the United States, Fox News has never been more powerful. And then there's other Fox News copycats, like OAN and others. But even so-called legitimate news organizations. Today, literally today, the Wall Street Journal, the storied Wall Street Journal, in their opinion section, which, let me just be clear, is different than the news section. I think most people don't understand that. They published an op-ed written by Donald Trump that was absolutely full of lies. Absolutely full of lies. It ran unchecked. Unchecked. But, you know, even among good news organizations, and I consider the act that that anybody, look, everybody's entitled to opinions, it's okay, we can debate different points of view, but for a legitimate news organization to publish things that are verifiable lies is beyond the pale. I don't think that would have happened a few years ago. Norms are changing, which I'll come back to in a second. But even among, you know, what I would consider responsible news organizations who are trying to do the right thing, they are challenged with reporting the news in this era. You know, the Trump era really created a crisis for many news organizations because news organizations are used to reporting because it's important. Today, the president said X, right? That's so many headlines for years, for decades, for generations. The president of the United States said this, the president of the United States says that. Maybe you might disagree with it, but generally speaking, you were hearing from a president, with a few exceptions. We won't talk about the Iraq War right now, never mind that. With a few exceptions, you were hearing a point of view from, you know, a Republican or a Democrat that was rooted in evidence-based reality. Here comes Trump. Trump stands up at a lectern like this and says, a lot of the times, whatever comes into his head. A lot of it is nonsense. A lot of it is dangerous nonsense. He literally suggested at a press conference drinking bleach. He has suggested, you know, hydroxychloroquine can cure COVID. He had his medical advisor standing to the side, just standing there like sheep. Nobody said anything. And how, if you're a news organization, what do? If you're television news, do you play this to people? If you're a headline writer, do you say, is your headline like it used to be, President Trump, drinking bleach will cure COVID? You can't. That's irresponsible. So what do you do? What do? So many news organizations struggled with the word they could not spit out in type, which is the word lie. Lie. It was always like mistruths, he misspoke, it was a falsehood, all these kind of things. And so it was very challenging for news organization. I will say as a journalist, I struggle with, I've finally gotten used to saying the word lie, but I would struggle with, you know, well, it wasn't accurate exactly. So because we like to present both sides. So trust also, we talked about the great flattening on platforms and why those, the great flattening and so much misinformation and the polarization, that is the other thing that is breeding mistrust in the media. And yet, the paradox, I mean it when I say it, this is the golden age of reporting. Investigative reporting around the world has never been more powerful. In the US under Trump, that same Trump that caused that was so difficult and caused so much angst in news organizations about how you present both sides when one side is presenting a pure falsehood, also was a boon for investigative reporting. There were so many cover-ups. There was incredible reporting on the tech industry. It wasn't that long ago that just a few of us were saying, you know what, the tech industry needs to be covered in the same way that, you know, any serious power is covered. And now we see it. I mean, just in the last few weeks with all of the Facebook coverage, it's just been extraordinary. The reporting on COVID has been just amazing. Such serious coverage that flies in the face of what so many public leaders are saying, what so many important people are saying, to try to get to some proximity to the truth about what is happening with the pandemic. Even while journalists themselves are struggling with the pandemic, we're all part of this global crisis. We see that happening in the changing way that news is reported. It used to be in the United States not that long ago that a police statement was considered a completely unassailable source of truth. And now newspapers don't take police statements at their word anymore, because they have begun to think more deeply. They've begun to have more diversity in their newsrooms, and have discovered that, guess what? Sometimes an official police statement is not the actual truth. So much power going into the hands of citizens. I mentioned this in a meeting earlier. 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, 17-year-old Darnella Frazier was in Milwaukee, was standing on the street when, my God, help me. George Floyd, sorry, name, I'm gonna blame it on the jet lag. George Floyd was murdered by the police. You know what? Had she not been there recording it on her mobile device and posting it on social media, there would have been no prosecution. There would have been no national story. There would have been no reckoning. So these are the kind of changes, positive changes that we're seeing in journalism. More coverage, more diverse perspectives. All over the world, I see tenacity from journalists, thoroughness, bravery. Journalists who do their job, in the immortal words of one of the founders of the New York Times, without fear or favor, who will not be intimidated, who will not be bought, who believe not in their own, not necessarily in themselves, but themselves as a conduit to the public's right to know. That leads me to my fourth observation about the state of the news media, one for which there is no but coming. There is no paradox. It is just an absolute. And it's a little bit grim, so I apologize for that. The free press is under assault. This is a global crisis, as the rise of illiberalism has emboldened autocrats and would-be autocrats to attack the press. Things have gotten worse under COVID. So many governments have used it, bad actors have used it as a handy excuse to take control of the press under the pretense of protecting the public health from so-called fake news, when really that was just a fig leaf to just control the press. It used to be just China, Russia, Iran, and let me tell you, things are getting worse in all three places. But now we're looking at major significant threats to a free press in countries that once had a vibrant free press. Brazil, Turkey, Poland, Nicaragua, South Africa, and in the US. The President Trump called the media the enemy of the people, and he encouraged his followers to not believe the press. This is what autocrats do. This is what dictators do. They say, don't believe what you read, don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear, just listen to me. And guess what? Tens of millions of people are listening. And I think Trump has actually emboldened leaders of countries around the world. They say, even in the United States, so I'm going to do it too. Reporters Without Borders, which puts out an annual report, in their report this spring about freedom of the press, said journalism has been totally blocked or impeded in 73 countries and constrained in 59 others, which together represents 73% of countries evaluated. They said, according to the report, only 12% of the countries they evaluated, the hundreds of countries they evaluated, have what they call a good environment for a free press. Not just not being attacked from the government, but also have good transparency, vibrant debate. And I will say, by the way, that neither the United States or Spain are included in that 12%. You know, the Nobel Prize this year was given to Maria Ressa from the Philippines and Dmitry Muratov from Russia. In the name and in the statement from the Nobel Prize Committee, they said that they're giving these awards in the name of all journalism. That without journalism, there is no democracy. I wish I thought that the people who needed to hear that really cared what the Nobel Prize Committee has to say. Unfortunately, they don't. And let me again just be really clear. This is not about journalists. Journalists lose their job, even journalists who are getting jailed or worse. That's a tragedy, but that is not a crisis of global proportions. The crisis of global proportions is about the public and the public's right to know. Imagine a world where these crackdowns go unchecked. Only rumor on social media, spread from person to person, or propaganda campaigns from the government and their allies. That basically is the end of democracy as we know it. There is no paradox here, no need for nuance, no need for context. All of us need to do what we can to stand up for a free press. And that's what I have to say to you tonight, and I look forward to the dialogue. So thank you very much. Am I sitting down here? Okay. I have no idea how long that was, but hopefully it was the right time.
Thank you very much, Vivian.
Muchas gracias, Vivian. Nos has dado muchas ideas y has mencionado muchos asuntos de los que podemos hablar. Te puedo hacer la primera.
Digital in Aspen, US, a commission on disinformation disorder.
Yeah.
And if you could tell us a little bit what's the purpose of this project and why do you prefer to use the expression information disorder rather than fake news?
Yeah. I'll start with the last one because that's easy. Fake news is a term. First of all, it's been co-opted. You know, it's become basically a meme. You know, in the United States, I don't know what it means. What does fake news mean? First of all, it's an oxymoron, right? Fake and news. But also, it's become co-opted by a lot of bad actors who basically have used it as a term to mean anything that I disagree with. So, and mis and disinformation is better, but it's a little limiting. So there's a term that was coined by an academic named Claire Wardle, information disorder. Information disorder captures the entire sort of universe of what happens when bad information, whether it is unintentional or intentional, enters the information ecosystem and spreads and causes falsehoods to be adopted and believed. So that's the answer to why we call it information disorder. It's just a little bit broader. So yeah, we started so the problem of the information ecosystem and information disorder is incredibly complex. It has everything all the things I just talked about and more all feed into information disorder. And there is no sort of single answer for how to solve it. And there's a lot of hand-wringing, and there's a lot of noise. There's also a lot of spectacular research that's being done, but it's all over the place, and no sort of mortal human can see all of these stories, all of this research, and know what are the best ideas, and how do we move things along. So what I think we're good at Aspen is we believe, first of all, we should never be the smartest people in the room. If we're the smartest people in the room, then we're doing something wrong. We want to gather the smartest people around us and elevate good ideas. So what we did is we put together a group of 16 commissioners who come from journalism, academia, government, civil society, civil rights, and philanthropy. And we tried to get very important, smart, high-level people, and the only way I could get them is if I said to them, because we really wanted them to work, is I've said to them, I'm only going to keep you for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, you're free. I promise this is not a lifetime commitment. So we got quite quite a good group, former congressmen, the head of a very powerful civil rights organization, a famous journalist named Katie Couric. We have Prince Harry. We have some other philanthropists, great academics. And the idea is to brief them on all the different, all of the background to information disorder. What are the best ideas? We had debate, discussion. We kept them on Zooms for hours every 2 weeks. We brought them to Aspen, where we spent 3 days together wrestling over these things. And we decided we want to come out with recommendations that are actionable in the short term. And while no single one of these things will solve all the problems, together they will begin to make a dent. And so our report is coming out. I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you about the whole report. I can't, but it's coming out in 2 weeks. And it has actions for government, civil society, and private industry of things to do to begin to reverse the tide.
Thank you so much. So the floor is open. If I can just ask you to say your name and keep your question short so everybody can have a chance to participate. Please.
I'm Lane Green.
No?
I can Lane back.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Lane Green. I'm a journalist myself at The Economist, and so give us a little bit of medicine to the profession. You mentioned government, civil society, and the public, but what can journalists do better to recover some of the trust that has been eroded over the last couple of decades?
Well, journalists. This isn't necessarily specifically tied to the report, but I'll just tell you to our commission. But I'll tell you what I think journalists need to do is to find ways to. There are several things that news organizations and many news organizations are doing. One is to find ways to not create false dichotomies. You know, it is in journalism. It's a tradition that you want to offer both sides, and that's good. You want to be impartial. You don't want to take sides on certain issues. That said, some issues there is no other side. You know, we don't say, you know, on the one hand, 6 million people were killed on the Holocaust. On the other hand, I mean, there is no other hand, right? There is no other hand. The same thing is true when it comes to democracy. The same thing is true when it comes to climate change. And the same thing is true when it comes to public health. Yes, there are nuances, of course. But take climate change. It is indisputable that climate change is real and that it has been exacerbated by humans. And we can debate about what are the solutions and what do we need to do about it and who should do what. Of course, we should debate that. But there is no debate. There is no other side that says this isn't real. And don't create a false he said, she said, where there is none. So that's number one. Number two, try to, and this is where it's tricky, you know, to report. It's so difficult right now to report on the kind of extremism that we see in countries all over the world and the kind of lies that are being propagated. How do you report on this without giving them oxygen? So, you know, I talked about Trump, you know, a headline. You don't want to have a Trump say, Trump, you know, bleach cures COVID, right? So you can't do that. And yet we see headlines, maybe not that bad, but like that all the time from very good news organizations. So trying to find a way to, you know, your lead has to be, you know, your lead has to be with information in the public interest. Here are the things that will help the decline of the spread of COVID. Some people, like the President of the United States, are saying things that have been disproven or even deadly, like drinking bleach, as Trump said today. I'm making up the language, as Trump said today in the briefing room. You know, and again, just putting those things in context. The third is who is around, who is in your newsroom? For too long in the United States, it has been well, for a long time it was white men. Then it was white men and women, and there has not been enough diversity in decision-making powers and decision-making positions of authority in the news organization. This has led to a lot of communities just not being covered and perspectives just not being taken into consideration. So there's three things. I could go on.
Thank you. Can you see him?
Sí, hola. Hola, ¿se oye? Hola.
Hi, I'm Joaquin Loza. I'm not a journalist, but I think that journalists are heroes, and they have a very difficult job, because media organizations are companies, and they need to make money. And the problem is that, as you've explained, the money is gone. So I think that news organizations, they need to work in less honest jobs to find funding from power sides, from governments, administrations. But at the end of the day, they're always run by those who run the country. I used to read newspapers, but a few years ago I stopped reading newspapers because I didn't want to make do the exercise of reading something in one newspaper, then you take another newspaper and you try to find some difference in the way they report. And the difference is that the news is not on the second one you read. Some of them, they emphasize some news, some others emphasize other news. What you can see on the front page on one newspaper, you can see it in page 40 of another newspaper. So I think that this is a problem for journalism. So that this is why I think journalists are heroes. Like 2 centuries ago, journalists would die. They would die not in Africa, in countries in Europe, because they were reporting on things that were against some powers. And this is not being done now in this country, in Spain. In this country, when COVID started, one of the first measures that were taken was to give away 15 million euros to the press organizations. We might think that there will be a problem in other industries, like in the shipbuilders, on the construction, but the first thing was to give money to the journalists to report in favor of the government. So I think that this is a problem. I think there's no solution for this. And if on top of that, we know that there's lots of journalism that is being done with AI, with machines, I think that this is very bad news for journalism, and there's no solution.
It's, I mean, if, yes, the business model for news is, in as I talked about in my remarks, is in a very difficult place. But journalism, no one should go into journalism. If you go into journalism just for the money, first of all, you're not a very smart business person, because nobody ever got rich on good journalism. And second of all, journalism is as much a calling. It's one of the few, even commercial news organizations, it's as much a calling, or it should be as much a calling as it is a business. Journalists have a public trust to deliver the news, again, without fear or favor, to the best of their ability, to discover the facts and let those facts take wherever they lead them. So yes, are there a lot of bad actors out there who are putting out stuff and calling it news? Yeah, but that's not journalism. There are plenty of heroic journalism, and there's plenty of heroic news organizations still out there. And journalists, by the way, still are dying today. That is not a thing of the past. And I fear the way things are going, many more will die in the course of their reporting. You know, there is no one single solution, but as I said, there's some encouraging signs. The public seems to be a little bit more willing to pay to support journalism. Philanthropic organizations are providing more support. You know, in some countries, public media is still quite powerful, like in Britain, you know, the BBC, for example. In other places like Poland, what used to be a very high-quality public broadcasting network is now a government mouthpiece. And they're trying to shut down their main competitor, which is TVN, which is excellent journalism. So it's a very mixed bag. I wish I could tell you I had the answer.
Yeah, my name is Rafael Minder. I'm a journalist. I write for the New York Times. Thanks for your insightful comments. I wanted to ask you a couple things. First of all, you talked at the end about the greater diversity in newsrooms. I'm wondering, where is the diversity and how do you reach it in terms of opinion? For example, newsrooms, it seems to me in the US, you'll struggle to find a Trump voter in certain newsrooms, just as you'll struggle to find a Democrat in others, when we know that pretty much the country voted, I mean, it voted clearly, but it still voted almost half-half in 2 elections in a row. So how do you get some diversity if you want to have a proper debate in a newsroom, not just by bringing in people of color and women and so on, but of different opinions? It seems to me that there isn't that at the moment. And then my second question was, you talked about the truths and so on, but it's very easy with hindsight. We can all agree about the 6 million victims of the Holocaust, but at the time of the Holocaust, people didn't know and didn't agree on what was going on. And when you mention climate change, or especially health, it seems to me we know nothing. I don't mean just journalists, I mean everybody. So, for example, should we have, with hindsight, we can say we should not have reported about weapons of mass destruction. At the time, very, very powerful people, one of them who died recently, were talking about it. Climate change, you can tell me that it's happening, but in fact, what exactly is happening is something that's not clear. Public health, even less. The WHO, an authority, recommended a year ago not wearing face masks. What do we do about that? Right. With hindsight, it's easy to know where the truth was or was not. What do we do about reporting on ongoing news?
Let me answer your second question first, and then you might have to remind me what the first question was. On the second, absolutely. And let you know, I maybe didn't provide quite enough nuance in my answer. In that there are shades of gray. The mask is a perfect example. You know, both the WHO and in the United States, you know, the great authority that a lot of people respect and a lot of people hate, Anthony Fauci, in the beginning said, you don't need to wear masks. And now we know that masks are one of the most effective means of stopping the spread of transmission. And we also know that part of it was concern that there wouldn't be enough masks for medical personnel. So absolutely, we can't, you know, journalists can't be cheerleaders. They report these things, they find independent sourcing. And by the way, when conditions change and when new information comes out, we need to say that very loudly and say, look, we reported this before based on this information. Now we know X, Y, and Z. So transparency is essential. So, of course, what I mean when I say, in the case of public health, though, or in the case of the election, there's a lot we don't know, but there are certain things we do know. At this point, it is indisputable that Joe Biden won the election. It is indisputable. There have been audits. There have been re-audits. There have been triple, quadruple, quintuple audits. A lot of those funded by those who were looking for a different answer. And even those audits led to the same result. So no news organization can now responsibly, at the time it was chaos, of course, can now responsibly report otherwise. So yeah, changing conditions, changing times, of course, that's what we do as journalists. We don't take any individual as the authority. We do our own sourcing, and we say, look, this is a change when we call it out. So anyway, I agree with you, I guess, was the long-winded say. The first one you were talking about, I think, diversity in newsrooms. So you're talking about ideological diversity, mostly is what you're questioning. I think there's no dispute about why, I'm happy to talk about why it's important to have race and gender and ethnicity diversity, but hopefully that's quite clear what the reasons are. Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, generally speaking, look, I would be lying if I didn't say that that journalists in reliable, quality news organizations probably tend to be more left-leaning than they are right-leaning. I think my theory is it has to do with the fact that journalists' highest calling, you know, the expression is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, right? So you know that expression, and that is sort of an ethos for a lot of journalists. that tends to match up with more progressive values, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It just is. So I think there is probably more left-leaning people in newsrooms, although most news organizations don't take polls and most journalists don't talk about what their political leanings are. So it is a problem to try to get diversity in the newsroom, because those points of view, I think even at the New York Times, there's an attempt to bring more people who are not just from the East Coast and the West Coast, but more people from rural America, journalists from rural America who bring different life experiences. In terms of op-eds in the opinion section, yeah, I mean, this is a problem. The New York Times is going through convulsion after convulsion about op-eds that try to represent different points of view, and then you have liberal journalists who are saying, how dare that my New York Times, and readers publish this, and then you have complaints on the right. It's a very difficult time right now. Polarization has affected everybody on the left and on the right. That said, I personally know quite a few people who would consider themselves maybe not Trumpists, because that's a different breed, and that requires sort of a suspension of belief of the evidence-based world. But I know plenty of conservatives who, would probably consider themselves Republicans at the New York Times and elsewhere.
Let's open the floor for more questions, and we'll go back to you, Rafael. Yes, Carlos, please.
Carlos Osada, I'm a university professor. I would like to go back to this report that is going to publish in 15 days. Have you any suggestion for precisely universities and for ordinary people also?
Yes, well, for universities, particularly those that study this, and researchers are a critical part of the portfolio of solutions for information disorder. And, a lot of experts and people in government and elsewhere are demanding that the tech companies provide more robust, transparent data sets to researchers in academic institutions, so they can really understand how misinformation travels, where its sources are, where its nodes are, who are the biggest spreaders of information, what the impact has, what the impact of targeting is, all of those kind of things. It is absolutely essential that that there be greater transparency and availability to qualified researchers to do that kind of study. So universities are at the center of that, and it's absolutely critical. In terms of the public, we're mostly not, there's a lot of things that the public needs to do, but one of the things that we discussed a lot in the commission meetings is it's not the public's fault. We can't put all of the burden and the blame on individual citizens who are, experience a cacophony of noise, information, lies, all mixed up on these platforms, and who themselves might be targets of mis and disinformation. And I'm speaking particularly about underrepresented communities who are both targeted within misinformation and who are put in harm's way because of mis and disinformation about them to other communities. So there are long-term solutions here that the longest term, but probably the most important, but it is not a solution overnight, is about in education, media literacy, news literacy, helping, not telling students what newspapers they should read and not read, but giving them the tools to be able to become responsible consumers, skeptical consumers of information that comes their way, and how to look for the cues and signals of what they might want to be cautious about or check out before they immediately spread it out to all their friends and families, to break out of their bubbles. So that's probably one of the most important thing that that citizens can do.
Silvia.
In Spanish.
Okay, I'm ready.
I'm really interested in your opinion about this educational work with young generations, because they are using other information channels and they get information through different channels that where in many cases quality and true information does not exist. And I'm thinking about the most recent cases we've seen in TikTok, a new channel that started like a series of funny videos, and lately in the last few weeks we are seeing true information, sometimes hard, difficult information in the content, but they do it through dances to hack the algorithm that TikTok is using in order to position themselves. So as educators, as teachers, as parents, could you explain your opinion about these new information channels that at the end of the day, maybe many of them will disappear in a few years and we will get new ones, but it's obvious that the traditional system, like you said before, conventional journalism, people who used to read 2-3 newspapers every weekend, that's disappearing or has disappeared. So how can we make our children have that critical thinking when these channels are changing so fast?
And I will say my bias is I love all of these new channels. I think it's absolutely fantastic. There's nothing. TikTok is a vessel. It is not, it is neither good nor bad. It's what fills the container that is the question that we have to look at. And I don't believe that the answer is to tell children, you know what, put all that stuff away, sit down with your newspaper, sit with a newspaper in your chair and read the newspaper cover to cover. It's never going to happen. We need to meet kids where they are. And if they're on TikTok, great. I mean, TikTok, I was having this conversation earlier, is phenomenal. Before we even talk about the news, the flowering of creativity and expression and talent is just an explosion on TikTok. That's wonderful. Let's use that model. I don't care if it's dance and it's song or whatever. That can be a great vehicle for good information. And I'm actually inspired by a lot of what kids are doing. You say they hack the algorithm. Maybe they hack the algorithm for bad. A lot of them are hacking the algorithm for good. In China, it wasn't TikTok they are Chinese owned. I've forgotten which platform right now with short videos. There's a young woman that starts off by saying, "I'm going to show you." She's like standing, got her, fancy top on and all that. She goes, "We're going to do a makeup lesson today. So all you girls, get ready, get your makeup ready." So, meanwhile, anybody that is not a teenage girl is like, "Ugh, get me out of here," right? So she gets the teenage girls and she goes, "Okay, we're going to talk about the Uyghurs." So, and it's amazing. She hacked the system. And so I'm actually quite inspired by a lot of kids. Many of them don't understand what they look like, but I think that's the way to reach kids. We're never going to get them to read a newspaper. It's never going to, a print newspaper. It's just never going to happen. And, it is the responsibility of these platforms, of course, to do what they can. And it's very difficult to, the content moderation, to try to eliminate anything that is harmful, anything that is, a threat to kids or adults, that is a threat to public health. We can't expect them to take down falsehoods. It's not, certainly in the United States, it's not illegal to lie, and it's not illegal to be wrong on the internet. And so that can't be the bar. But what platforms can do, because they're so algorithmically driven, is uprank good information and downrank bad information, even if they don't entirely eliminate it.
Thank you. Yes, please. Sorry if I didn't see you before.
What do you think about net neutrality and
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, what do you think about net neutrality and to compel these platforms that are actually monopolies not to block anyone and the access to these platforms as a human right and not at aleatory reasons?
I think that the net neutrality debate is not necessarily, I think, quite as relevant to the debate about news media per se. But I think that there are other laws in the United States that have direct impact on the content moderation decision-making of the platforms. There's something called the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. So say that 10 times fast. So Section 230, which, was created, what, 1996 is what, 30 years ago, 25 years ago? I can't count. And was important. Without Section 230, did I say net neutrality? I meant Section 230, sorry. Without Section 230, there would be no internet as we know it today, because it gave the platforms immunity from the content that users post on their platform, with the exception of content that is illegal, child pornography, sex trafficking, that kind of thing. It gave them immunity so that they could not be sued if somebody on their platform says something wrong on the internet. It also allowed them to make content moderations decisions however they see fit. If they decide we're going to ban this person and not ban this person, they have that right. I've said this in a meeting earlier. People think that people accuse the platforms of people say, oh, I was shut down on Twitter. It's a violation of my First Amendment protection. No, the platforms they themselves are protected by the First Amendment. They're not the government. They're private platforms. They can do whatever they want on their platforms. But Section 230, both in the United States, the left and the right are trying to change Section 230. They feel like it is the cause of all evil. But if you're on the left, you think Section 230 is a problem in one way, in that I'm overgeneralizing. The left thinks that Section 230 is a problem because it is allowing too many harms to spread, support for, January 6th, insurrection, etc. And on the right, they don't like Section 230 because they think it has enabled the platforms to suppress conservative speech, which, by the way, is demonstrably not true, because every week there's a ranking of what the most popular posts are, and they're almost all from ultra-right-wing conservatives, so that's not true. So Section 230 right now is sort of a punching bag, and that probably I think that what happens with Section 230 in Congress, if anything happens at all, right now it's hard for anything to happen in Congress on any topic at any time, could have profound impact. I think more than net neutrality debate, which I think is important for different reasons, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry to come back again.
Oh,
Two things. First, I wanted you to just clarify on the Trump letter. It was actually a letter in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. Would you recommend not having it published, or would you recommend publishing it with an explanation of what was wrong in its content? That's the first thing. And the second is, when you talked about the threat, the freedom of press being under threat, you talked about the countries where it's under threat. Some of these countries, of course, the ones that I remember you cited was South Africa, Brazil, did not have freedom of press a few decades ago.
Fair.
So we have very short memories, so we think, oh, it's under threat. Actually, under apartheid, there was not even freedom of anything. So my question is, do you think it's just that there are swings, and depending on how the countries do, their freedom of press goes up or not? Or do you really think there is an overall movement in one direction? I mean, is it, maybe China will explode politically at some point, the Communist Party will disappear, then we will say freedom of press has never been greater because 1 billion plus people have full freedom of press.
So on your first question, it has been the practice of responsible news organizations, even in their opinion pages, and let's be very clear, the opinion group at the Wall Street Journal is very different than the newsrooms. Two different leaders, two completely different things. So let me just be really clear of that. And the Wall Street Journal, in their editorials, they are unabashedly quite conservative. There's no problem with any of that. Opinions are fine. Opinions you may disagree with are fine. What is not okay is opinions that are rooted in falsehood. The old expression from the Senator Moynihan, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not everybody's entitled to their own facts. And the Trump letter was filled with falsehoods. So if it were me, ordinarily what you would do if it were not the former president of the United States, you would send the letter back and say, we're happy to print your opinion of why you think our electoral process is broken, but you need to correct this information because there is ample evidence that this point is not true. And you don't publish it, even if it's an unpopular opinion, until that opinion is rooted on evidence-based reality. Okay, so Trump is, but some might say Trump is an incredibly important figure. He is undeniably an important figure. He was president of the United States. He could be president of the United States again. You need to give him a voice. So the second option would be you print the letter and you print it alongside a fact check. But to just print it with no comment, as if, is absolutely unconscionable, in my opinion. What was the second question about? Just remind me the subject and I'll... Oh, yeah. Point well taken. Look, a lot of these countries go in and out. So you're right about South Africa under apartheid. There was a moment when journalism was thriving there. I understood. I completely agree. Evidence points to an overall decline. And I'm looking at organizations like Reporters Without Borders, Committee to Protect Journalists, Freedom House, very respectable organizations who have been tracking press freedom for years against measurable set of indices are showing a decline. Countries, look at the United States. I'll just point to the United States. I never in my lifetime imagined that I would see the threats to a free press like I did in the Trump era, where the president of the United States would call the news media the enemy of the people, and that it was dangerous to go to election rallies for journalists. I'm sorry, that's anecdotal. I completely understand that, but evidence points to across the world declines, even though individual countries go up and down.
Thank you. May I add one more question? We have a few minutes. Aspen Digital, the division of Aspen that you lead, has also done work and research on the effects of digital technology on mental health, on fragmentation, on paralysis, or an inability to act collectively to solve important social problems. Could you comment on that, please?
Oh, sure. Well, there's a lot we do besides mis and disinformation in journalism, although I always seem to end up talking about that because it's so top of mind and so important. But there's so many other issues with societal impact across the digital ecosystem. I'll mention a couple. One, you talked about the impact. We're in very, very early days of understanding the impact of ubiquitous connectivity on mental health and well-being, particularly for young people. There's anecdotal evidence. You've seen some of the research, about YouTube and Instagram, but it's the beginning. It's really the beginning of this kind of research. We are trying to, again, we are not researchers ourselves, but what we do is we bring people together, the smartest people that we can find in academia, and we work closely with the platforms. We include them in everything. We want their voice at the table with mental health experts, whatever it might be, to understand what the impact is. And by the way, I am not I love technology. I'm not a Luddite. I believe in the power of technology. So let me just be clear. Technology has the power to be used to help improve people's mental health. But we need to understand it first. We need to understand what the impact is and what the triggers are. You know, now we're going to be maybe moving into the metaverse. I'm a little skeptical, but what is going to be the impact of having, you know, experiences where we are represented as avatars? What does that do to the way that we perceive ourselves? Particularly concerned about young people. We're also doing research on algorithm and data bias. So you know, so many industries right now, decision making is partially automated by algorithms that are reading across data and making certain determinations based on how that algorithm is designed. For example, for job applications, a lot of companies use tools that sift through all of the resumes and applications looking for positive or negative attributes, or what the algorithm has determined in positive, negative attributes, and saying these are the candidates that should be interviews and these are the candidates should not. Same thing with getting loans for college, to get a mortgage to be able to buy a home. Same thing with policing as well. And a lot of these algorithms are very biased, the way they're designed, even if they weren't intended to be, towards people of color or other certain attributes that the designers of the algorithm, based on their own life experience, have determined are less desirable than whatever their life experience is, in many cases as a white man. That's just the reality of, it's just what the data shows of a lot of how these algorithms are being designed. So we're doing work on that. We're doing, gosh, I'm trying to even remember. We're looking at trying to understand the impact, the relationship between teenagers and preteens and technology. Mostly because we believe, I was talking about this a little bit earlier, in the incredible creativity and the power of young people to use their digital natives, right? They grew up trying to swipe on magazines, you know, so they speak the language of digital technology, and they have the power to reinvent reinvent journalism, reinvent governing, reinvent getting information to people. They can express themselves in ways that is so positive. But in order to do it, first, and this is what our project is about, in order to do that, first they have to have broadband connectivity, which is not the case in many places. They need, particularly kids in school, they need access to devices. They need media literacy, so do their parents and guardians. They need data protections online for children under 18 who are not protected. They're being, you know, their data is being collected and they're being fed just like all of us are. Certain, you know, ads I'm not so worried about, but more recommendations, and that platforms for children under 18 can be a safe space from abuse. So all of these things are a precondition to then inspiring and empowering kids to be, you know, the next leaders of the world. So those are some small issues we're looking at.
Thank you so much. I speak for myself, perhaps for some of you, but I feel comforted, even though I wasn't afflicted. And I
didn't scare you enough? Oh, I didn't do my job.
No, I share a lot of your optimism, yeah. But you know, thank you for opening up, you know, so many good questions, and for your presentation, also for this colloquium. Thank you all, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.